largest tribal colleges catering to Native Americans is the Navajo Nation, and I teach Navajo, so really enjoy it. My jewelry is from Navajo. My boys, I have two boys. Jared is my oldest, and he was raised on the Navajo reservation, so he's a res boy, is what we call him. And so a little background on my study. I was born and raised in Arizona, and I played basketball at a community college. And so part of my study is going back to the community college because there's not a lot of data. The universities get a lot of attention, so there's not a lot of data on community colleges. So the background again, kind of what I just said, there's not a lot of when you go back into the research, most of it is on universities. Universities get a lot of attention, they get a lot of, like your more excellent students, and so that's where they're driven. So I wanted to definitely focus on the community college level. And a lot of it was quantitative data. I wanted qualitative data to get interviews, to get information on how they felt. So problem statement, it is not known how student athletes describe self-efficacy and self-motivation while coping with the demands of being a student athlete at community college. So a lot of what I'm doing is comparing how a lot of students go to college and they struggle just academically. So when you have the academic component and then you add the demands of playing a college sport, it's a little challenging because you have that the double pressure. Purpose statement was to explore the research and student athletes in the state of Arizona and describe self-efficacy and motivation while coping with the demands of being an athlete. So I say that at a community college in the state of Arizona because they asked me not to say who they were, they asked to remain anonymous. So I always, within my research, always really respect what they said, and it's just a community college in the state of Arizona. So 3 different theories that I used throughout my study was self-efficacy, stress and coping theory, and self-determination theory. A lot of it is how do they deal with themselves internally that increases their success rate. So the expected practical significance, I kind of really wanted to get the insight of how they felt, and that's why it was like a quantitative study, is because a lot of us, they just want to push data. How is this data, but how do they actually feel? What are they going through? What determines their success, their confidence, their self-efficacy? And so I really wanted to dive into what kind of tools that they need to help them be successful. So the research was a qualitative methodology. The approach was getting their perspective as we were going through this. And I really got to sit down and talk to them and really deep down get into their perceptions of how they felt and why they felt it and how they got their self-efficacy. The phenomenon and investigates community college, student athletes, self-efficacy and motivation. How they balance athletics and academics. So I targeted 2 research questions. How do college student athletes describe self-efficacy in managing sports and academic performance? And the second research question was, how do college student athletes describe self-motivation as an influence of self-efficacy as it relates to academic performance? The sample size where they had to be full-time, enrolled in school, and also enrolled into an athletic program. They are part of there's a part of their conference, they have different rules and regulations, so they had to be involved in that. So our sample here, the sample size that I ended up with was, I did individual interviews of women, male and female, and then I also did 2 focus groups, a male and female focus group. The data source was those pulling from the individual interviews and the focus groups. And so what I did is I went into a room with them and I recorded them and took notes as I was, different observations of what they were going through, how they were feeling as they were talking to me. And some were gender focused and some weren't gender focused. And so when I did usually when you do a data, you spread out to 250 students and we ended up with 45. And then after I captured the interviews, we transcribed them, and then as we're transcribing them, we identified themes which were pulled from those transcripts. So a sample profile, I did baseball team, softball team, and the tennis team. And so some of those data themes that I pulled from the research questions, the first theme from research question number 1 was student athletes displayed self-efficacy through coping skills and navigating challenges. Theme 2 was most student athletes rely on support systems to boost their self-efficacy. And then theme 3 was intrinsic and extrinsic motivations influence the self-efficacy of student athletes concerning academic performance. So those were the 3 different themes that I pulled from the interviews and as I got the results. So finding compared to other studies, so the athletes that their challenges aligned with the findings of previous studies, and their support from peers was peers, coaches, their support system was really important, and their influence on academics influenced their self-efficacy and their confidence. So really, a lot of it, their support system really showed a lot on how they felt about themselves, because a lot of the student athletes would go back when they would struggle. Who would they turn to? A lot of them turned to their coaches, their families, some of their teachers. So a lot of it was the support system that they found and their interaction with each other. So the practical implications, I think a lot of it is understanding what makes them successful and then implementing things to help them become successful. So counseling, say these are the things that will help them succeed, and then implementing that support system to help them become better. So the study strengths. So we identified it under research population. So that is study strength number 1. Another strength is that we identified detailed themes that really pulled out the data on what they really struggle with. And then the very data collection methods, which was individual interviews and focus groups. Some of the limitations was that it was just only at one community college, and also that it was only during a certain time. So I pulled the data from the spring, and sometimes that's kind of the end of the year. I didn't pull from different seasons, so that could be something that was a limitation. Recommendation for future research would be comparing extrinsic and extrinsic motivation Also, identify, examine more of people's support systems and how they react. Also would be to study more community colleges and identifying motivation factors to help them succeed. Potential practical applications, offering counseling to address specific needs and stressors that student athletes face. Create coursework that aligns with the student athletes, because a lot of the problems was I'm missing class and the teacher wouldn't work with me, and so I'm struggling in that class. But a lot of it was the alignment of how the college ran with how the professors interacted with the student athletes. It really contributed to their success, or their self-efficacy and their confidence. So the Nepal boys wanted to turn the time over to us, so I'll turn the time over to Jared for questions. Just kidding. Any questions?
Questions, please? Gentlemen? Question. Who's asking me?
Okay.
So, Angelica has some questions too, but first I'll start. Do you think the youth today are the same as when you were a young lady?
No,
What's
it's really
different?
different. There's a lot of social media, like the internet wasn't as popular then. I feel like we did a lot of more things outside, so a lot of that outside built your inner confidence because you're outside doing things, you're more active. I think a lot of them more now are secluded, and I think that seclusion brings some insecurities, and I think the insecurities, that's why they rely a lot on their support system. And I think the ones that don't have support systems struggle because they don't have that inner confidence and that motivation. And a lot of the pressure was, hey, I'm the star. A lot of them are stars from their little hometowns, and then you go to a bigger fish. So you're not the star. And so there's a lot of pressure to keep up that stardom as you move up a level because it's a little more difficult. And so a lot of the internal pressure makes them want to succeed. So there's a lot of motivating factors. Like a lot of them are the first students to go to college from their family. And so there's a lot of a lot relies on them. So I think the support is really important.
I have a question here. You said that you are giving them consolation to succeed or to succeed. What if they don't succeed? How you will after that manage the situation after that?
Yeah.
How is their reaction if they fail?
Yeah, usually if they fail, they'll lose their scholarship or they'll lose because it's very highly competitive. Sometimes there's only 10 spots of a 5,000 population of student athletes, and so you can really, and that would really lower your motivation. That's why I kind of looked into it, because if you can help them while they're here, then that prevents them from falling down. There's different things that you could do is like study tables, building that support group where you have counselors, so if they are failing, you catch them early, and then you can, kind of build them up. Kind of like not rehabilitate, but if you find them faster, I think it's easier to help them succeed better.
And you say succeed better to again continue the sport or in different fields?
I think most of their motivation is to be successful in sports, so they go to school to make sure that they can play the sport. So I think really is you have to keep a certain grade point average to participate in sports. So there's that motivation. So succeeding would be to stay in the sport while you have to catch up classes. So I think they kind of go hand in hand.
How many go to college not to succeed in the sport, but to get the scholarship to go to college to do something else?
I think it depends where your motivation. probably a lot of your upbringing. So a lot of my upbringing was sports emphasis and not academic emphasis. And so it was about playing the sport, not about the degree. So I think it really depends on how you were raised.
Other questions or comments?
May I comment?
What's that?
If they fail,
Come here, you'll just stand up.
congrats. I have read seen this before, and I still cannot understand this issue. I mean, they are stimulated just for this.
Some of them are.
Yeah.
Some of them are.
And being good students, it's not the issue. I mean, they are not
Sometimes.
sometimes.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Because if you're not a good student and you're failing, you don't get to play. So it is a big issue.
But the first interest is the sport.
So yeah.
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 So if they fail, what happened to this?
They fall off. They get replaced.
But they be not more stimulated for
Sometimes.
staying in.
Probably
that
a
is
lot of
good.
it's on their self-efficacy and their motivation to, yeah,
That's the point.
right,
The motivation.
right.
If they are not motivated, are they more angry and unhappy in fighting? That's the
Yeah,
question.
yeah,
You face these things. So, stimulation and support, counseling should help have a peaceful place. That's the question.
mhm.
This?
I think so, yep.
Okay. I'll need to talk later with you because I'm very interested on this student stimulation for being more conscious about school and not academics and not being so activist.
Right. Well, you see, most of them are, if they're at that level, athletically, that's their bread and butter. That's what they go to. That's their strength. So that's what they go to, and then this allows them to play on the next level, and a lot of it, the academics is just kind of a side. So that's been trained, where the academics has not been trained as much. You know how you spend so more hours practicing, instead of in the library and stimulating. So there's an uneven balance most of the time, not all of the time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense. Because sometimes you have not the sports to stimulate. So they need another way of being stimulated.
Mhm.
Maybe
Mhm.
politics. That's what I'm trying to think tomorrow morning. Yeah.
All right.
To compare to this issue
Yeah.
you are presenting right now.
Mhm.
Because if they are occupied, stimulated, they are not
Yeah.
in crisis.
Yeah, I'm also a professor, and we have actually our athletes are probably our worst students because they just care about sports, and I don't want to say that's the norm because you have those really smart ones that are athletic, but most of the ones in my school, the athletes are the worst academically because 90% of their time is spent running, training. That's what they enjoy, that's their interest. So then it's hard to kind of, how can we raise this to meet this?
But they are harmonic